You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
Blair, today we are talking about, well, until we come up with a better title, we're going to use yours.
I thought you were going to say until we come up with a better topic,
Yeah,
because there's such a backstory here.
Yeah, it's going to be approaching normal. For the life of me, I don't see the upside in this topic for you because I'm just interrogating you on the extent to which you are a valuable and accurate predictor of what's happening in the marketplace. And this isn't me saying, hey, Blair, let's look at your portfolio choices over the last 4 years. You're the one that suggested this. Is this some sort of step 7 in some self-flagellation program you have or what?
Let's just be honest with the listeners. We usually have a bunch of episodes in the can, and we're recording this at the end of July 2021, and some things happened this summer, and we've used up all the back episodes. So now we're flying without a net here, if that's the metaphor.
There's a lot of we in your statement. You must have some friend in your pocket.
And we couldn't record last week because I haven't been to work in weeks and my brain isn't switched on. So we had nothing to talk about. We went to Twitter and asked for all these topic ideas, and there were a whole bunch of great ones, and we were about to record one and then another. But you first pointed out, and then I pointed out a couple of them. We've already recorded podcasts on these topics. Like, we might be approaching not normal, but we might be approaching done for Two Bobs.
Yeah, we think of ourselves as the library in Alexandria. There's nothing else left to add. What else could... No, I did think, as soon as I saw the topic idea, this will be good, because it forces me to think, too, about my predictions. I made a really bad prediction. I think most of what I thought, there are 2 that didn't work out very well. One didn't work out at all. And you made some similar predictions. This was an article, I don't remember when you wrote it. Was it about a year ago or so? And you made 4 of them?
Yeah, 4 regrets you're about to have. We recorded a podcast episode on it about a year. I think it was June or July of 2020.
Yeah.
So I was making some predictions, and I guess I've asked you to make me eat my own dog food.
Well, let's dive right in, Mr. Enns. Well, you wrote this during a period of quite a bit of uncertainty. We had no idea what was coming or how long it would last.
Yeah, unlike now, where there's no uncertainty.
So your first regret that you said, in other words, look ahead, think ahead. What is it that you probably want to think about doing now or thinking differently? And later, if you don't do it, you're probably going to beat yourself up. And the first one that you said, the future regret you might have is, I should have taken time off. And at the time, it was such an obvious statement because a lot of people didn't have a lot to do at the moment, right? But they're sort of glued to watching the TV and doom scanning social media and figuring out what's coming next. And there weren't in a middle place to do it. But talk about this first one. I should have taken time off. How did you do on that first? I should ask that.
Well, I did poorly at first because I know that I'm a sprinter and I have certain cycles where I'm able to sprint and then I lie down and recharge. And I've built vacations and effectively built a business around those sprints. And then pandemic hits and these March vacations, which are crucial to me, don't happen. We don't go anywhere. You try vacationing at home, but it's not the same thing. So you, or I guess I'm talking in the general you, but I'm really talking about me here and thinking that this translates. You keep working, you keep going, but your productivity just diminishes. So I wasn't able to recharge in the regular places, but there's one big place in my calendar where I'm pretty good at recharging, and that's called summer, July and August. So I had a couple of weeks vacation planned in the calendar, but at some point really early in July, it might have even been June now, it feels like a long time ago, I just quit going to work. And it's been the best thing I've ever done, David.
You know, there is a diminishing return at some point. I don't know if you've looked a little further to the right.
You know, I'm testing the theory that there might not be.
You sound like that guy from Office Space sitting in the restaurant.
Peter sitting with Joanna. She's saying, what do you do? He starts to describe it. And he says, it doesn't matter. I'm just not going to go anymore. And she says, you're going to quit? He goes, no, I'm just not going to go. And that's me. I just haven't been going to work. I go, in air quotes, to work for 2 reasons. Number one is the weekly staff meeting that I dial in from home. Mm-hmm. And then if you and I are recording a podcast, I come into the office. So I haven't been here in 2 weeks. I walk in here and I look at my desk. It's like, what are all these papers doing on my desk? Who broke into my office and put all this work stuff on my desk? But it was me from a few weeks ago. So I am making up for the fact that I did not take enough time off. And I have to tell you, this is fantastic. I am living the life. I should have discovered this years ago. Just don't go to work.
You know what the next question is that she asked the guy across the table in that clip is, how are you going to pay your bills?
Oh, yeah. And he said, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that either.
Yeah, I don't like paying bills either. I've never enjoyed it. And then he says, okay, why don't you come over to my place and let's watch some Kung Fu.
Kung Fu, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm most interested really in what's the lesson moving forward? Assuming that we have a somewhat normal life, business life moving forward, that there aren't any big lockdowns or something like it. What is the big message that we should take away in terms of time off?
I see people who have done a pretty good job. I see people who are in my state right now, like just not going to work. And I don't know if it's just Bader-Meinhof phenomenon where as soon as you buy a Honda Civic, you see Honda Civics everywhere. As soon as you quit going to work, you see people who have quit going to work everywhere.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if that's it, but I think I'm seeing, and there's absolutely no science here, it's purely anecdotal. I think I'm seeing a pretty good kind of like barbell diversification of people who are still burned out, who have not taken enough time, and then people who are just taking lots of time. Moving forward on this prediction, I think a lot of us have learned some lessons about how much time we need off, and not just in vacation chunks. I have some family visiting, and we were sitting around I was going to say fire last night, sitting around the smoke in the air last night. And one of my family members was saying they used to start work at 8 in the morning, and everybody has like a roughly 30 to 60 minute commute. He said, now they start at 9 and nobody goes into the office. So there's that 2 hours of the day where they're freed up. And then he was saying that in his own work style, you know, they've got kids at home. So he works in fits and starts. Like he lets work build up, gets a whole bunch done, feels great, takes a little bit of time off during the day. So just the cycle, when I was talking about my cycle, I'm talking about the calendar year. There are spots in the calendar year where I know I'm going to sprint and then I'm going to collapse at the finish line. And I have these like beautiful places in the world where I might go to. One of them might be here in Casa for the summer, where I collapse. And so that's the routine that I've built. But there's also the weekly routine and the daily routine. I suspect there's still a fair number of people out there who just haven't been able to make it work because they've got kids at home, et cetera, and are still burned out. But I think there's a lot of people who have a new routine. And here's my theory. I think a lot of people have figured out that they work too much. Again, it could just be Bader-Meinhof phenomenon.
Yeah.
I'm seeing myself everywhere.
Well, it's also complicated by the fact that they had the time to take time off, but there really wasn't much that they could do that was as fun as before. So It's like an endless vacation at your own home and you can't go anywhere. It just felt weird, right? It's interesting to me to think about the compromises that principals make in order to not have a boss. And we've talked about that in different ways. And because it's so measurable, it's easy to talk about the compromises they make in their own compensation. Many of them could just quit and go work somewhere else for probably a more typical work week, less financial risk, and a fair bit more money. But we don't talk enough about the fact that they are not taking advantage of taking time off, which they could do because they're in charge. I think that's wearing people out more than the money thing. I think it's just this headspace. I don't know where I got the idea from. Maybe it was you or maybe it was another friend or something. But the idea is like, why do you work on Friday? If your business allows you to not work on Friday, then don't work on Friday. Or at least try it, or maybe a half a day. I've got several clients that are going to 4-day work weeks, not fewer hours, but just compressed into 4 days so that there are those 4-day sprints and then 3 days off. I think we ought to experiment more with that. That feels like the most untapped area of entrepreneurial control for us right in front of our faces, and we're not doing enough with it.
I agree. I think there's been this, not a consensus, but I think there are a lot of people, a lot of business owners who've just asked the question, why are we working so much?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of 4-day work weeks. Like there isn't much work that gets done at Win Without Pitching on Fridays. Half of the team is off. The other half, we rarely schedule anything in terms of coaching or training on a Friday. Started out as a summer thing, and now it's just a thing. And I think I'm seeing that elsewhere, a realization that we're just a little bit too much of just kind of logging the hours.
Yeah.
And I think because a lot of us have been forced to juggle work and home obligations, particularly kids, we found out that we can be just as productive in less time. So why are we working so much? So I don't mean to dwell on this too much, but another thing that's related, have you noticed that now that you can socialize again, you have less desire to do so?
Yeah. What's happened for me over the last year and a half is the truth has surfaced in so many areas of my life. I now am so much clearer about what I want in life, what I don't want. I know so much more about people. I think better of some people and less of others. It's not anything that we were doing wrong before. We just didn't have a reset button on our lives, and that's what it did, right? And so it forced us to think about some things in new ways. It's so healthy.
Yeah.
I don't want to minimize all the pain. I mean, there was really significant pain through all of this. That's not something we would wish on anybody. But let's at least leverage the opportunity to think a little bit differently. All right, so that was the first one about working. And we also did a great podcast. Remember, this is one where I interviewed you. And there was, I forget exactly the phrase, but it was something like you take time off work in order to be productive. It wasn't the other way around. You don't just earn a certain amount of time off by doing great work. You can't even do great work until you earn it by taking time off.
Yeah, that's a strategic coach principle where 3 different types of days, focus days, buffer days, and free days. And you start with the free days because most entrepreneurs in particular do not have enough time off.
Right.
Time off is a requirement for you to be productive. It is not a reward for good behavior.
Yes.
My team's been really supportive of me not going to work, and it's been this joke. And my wife was my business partner. The areas she's responsible for, she's understaffed, she's hiring, she's working really hard. I have a little bit of sense of guilt, but not so much that I'm pitching in to help. It's like, no, you need to come closer to where I am. I'm not getting dragged back into this work thing that you have found yourself in.
This work thing that you insist on doing for our family. Like, where does that come from? All right. So you were sitting there thinking ahead, saying, what are the 4 regrets you might have? And the first one is how much time you're taking off. The second one was, in quotes here, I should have produced some content or built my audience. In other words, taking the time off from client work and thinking more clearly about something, developing a point of view, sharing that, not just to help with new business, but also to just expand your brain. That was that regret, right? What happened with that?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about that one and the 2 that follow, and even the first one, they're built on the assumption that the economy had ground to a halt, and it had at the time of that writing. So we're all going to have this free time on our hands. But what's really happened, some firms, talk about this K-shaped recovery. I would say there's a selection bias here, but most of the firms that you and I do business with and talk to on a regular basis, and I've done a Twitter poll, I forget what the survey is, but far more than 50% have found themselves in good economic position. The pandemic has, I'll just say it like it is, has been good for business, or they've been able to respond in a way where they've had a better year financially, business-wise, across every meaningful metric than they expected to, and maybe even better than the previous years. So my assumption was, okay, economic gridlock, you're going to have all this time on your hands. And that just hasn't been the case. So I don't know, like from my own point of view, I'm supposed to be working on a book this summer, and I did a pretty good job of it, getting to my first milestone. I hit that milestone, and then I was supposed to keep writing to get to the finished manuscript.
What was a milestone?
I'm not going to say.
The title?
Yeah. I have a working title. I don't have the final title yet. Okay. It's a miniature version of the book.
Yeah.
For reasons I won't get into because I don't want to jinx this book by talking about it more than we already have. So I felt pretty good about my progress. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to quit going to work, but I'm going to continue to write. And then at some point I realized, no, I'm not even in the headspace to write. So I'm just not doing anything other than talking to you and sitting through a weekly staff meeting.
Yeah.
So the assumption was that you're going to have all this time. And I think that just wasn't the case. Yeah, I found a whole bunch of time because I quit going to work, but for reasons I've already talked about.
I've seen people be more diligent about their own insight development process and taking marketing their own firm more seriously. But I don't think it's come from the fact that they've had more time or thought they would have more time. I think it's more they realize that they didn't have as much control over their future as they thought they did, because here's this external event that seemed so unlikely happened, and they realized how quickly something could close down. Now, in the end, it didn't quite. In fact, to expand on your comment earlier, I think most firms that got the PPP money, which is a U.S. version of this, most of them didn't even need the money. They didn't spend it, and it's still sitting there. So anyway, but they're still taking this positioning stuff very, very seriously, but not because they had more time, but because they felt a little bit more vulnerable from all of this. And I've been in this, you have too, we've been in this long enough to know exactly what's going to happen next. I don't know when, but it's going to be 3 months or 9 months from now. But the next big concern is not where's the work going to come from, but where are the people going to come from? I cannot find great people.
Oh, I'm seeing that now.
And it's like this feast and famine cycle, and we don't pay attention to marketing until the work isn't there, and then we worry about spinning the flywheel up fast enough. And the same thing for people. It's like, this is not the time. I mean, there's no better time to start right now, obviously, but having a consistent recruiting strategy, I think that needs to happen no matter what the recruiting market is like. Yeah. Anyway, I'm really off topic here.
Well, back to content creation, it just, as you're talking, it occurs to me, you've been as prolific as ever. Just telling a little bit of your story here. You're like shattering your record of a best year ever.
Yeah.
Like you're in a one-person consulting business. You're doing the revenue that a 10-person agency might do. And you're continuing to produce content at the same pace. What medication are you on?
Yeah, or not on.
And is it legal in Canada?
Well, it comes from two places for me. One is that I have felt the panic of not enough work in another life, and I just never want that to happen again. I'm okay going down swinging, but I got to be swinging. Like, if this whole thing ends at some point, I'm going to be okay with that if I did my part. So that's a big part of what motivates me. But the biggest part is I'm just addicted to writing. I get grouchy. I get like what it must be if somebody needs a fix if I don't write. So I write mainly for myself. It feels good to do it, and I appreciate the opportunity, but it's kind of a selfish thing because I don't know what else to do with that.
I've never hated you more than I hate you right now.
That's all right.
I used to be addicted to writing. One day I will be again, but it won't be in July or August.
Yeah, we know that.
It's going to be the Tuesday after Labor Day.
And we should also mention, we have a global audience for this thing. And the way things have turned around in the U.S. is leading that turnaround. It's not the same in other countries. So part of what we're talking about is going to resonate with U.S. listeners. And like in Canada, the turnaround is not as fast. It's not quite at the same level that it is in the U.S. So just want to acknowledge that.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
All right, the third one, future regret that you wanted us to think about was I should have upgraded my skill set or our team's skill set. I'm curious what you mean by that specifically. Maybe you can give me some examples of that. And then how did you do? How did other firms do? That's really more interesting to me. How did other firms do with that?
Well, I think this is another false prediction that was predicated on the assumption that we're all going to have all of this time off.
Right.
We're all going to have this downtime. It didn't last. Probably a couple weeks after that post went out, certainly no more than 4 weeks, it was evident that even though there was some economic gridlock initially, so many firms were busier than ever. And not only busy doing what they used to do, but busy doing things differently, right? They had to respond.
Right.
In our business, we have 55% of our revenue was tied to me getting on a plane. Now it's 0. So we had to make some pivots quickly, as a lot of firms did. Maybe the nature of their offering didn't change, but the package did, how they delivered it. So everybody was busy with A, doing the work that they used to do before, or B, doing new work, and C, doing either A or B in a new way.
Right.
So I just don't think there was the downtime in the typical firm where it was like, all right, everybody, instead of focusing on client work because there is none, let's build our skills. Let's do some professional development work. Now, having said that, I run a training company and we delivered a lot of training over the last year.
Is that in part because if there was any skill they really wanted to master, it was new business and sales and pricing?
Yeah, there is that, right? But I can take all of our clients, and I'm fond of hasty generalizations. I could put them into one of two buckets. There's like emergency work, and then there's refinement or improvement work. An emergency is like, okay, we're signing up because we need leads right now. Man, I just haven't seen much of that at all. I saw a lot of, hey, things are good, and maybe a lot of government stimulus money.
Right.
That, as you point out, a lot of these firms got it, and they took it because they didn't know whether they would need it or not, or for whatever their reasons were. And it turned out that, okay, things are okay and we have this money. Let's channel some of this into training. So I guess I have some of the governments to thank for the good year we've had in the last year. But what we saw is a drop in private training where we would go into a firm, and obviously it's done virtually now, and train a large number of people. But we saw a big increase in single people from many firms stepping up and buying training. I don't know how much it's appropriate to extrapolate that across investing in skill development across the board. That's just a microcosm of what I saw.
Apart from the kind of training that you folks, your team does, where do you think some of the biggest gaps are in terms of skill development as you look across firms, thinking things like strategy, research, incorporating AI, account management, project management? There's so many options. Are there any glaring places where you think there's a hole here where people could make up some ground pretty quickly?
Google's got these certificate programs now where if you complete them, they'll treat them as the equivalent of a 4-year degree when hiring for Google. And I think that areas that they're offering are probably the key areas where we're going to see a lot of professional development where there just aren't enough people with enough skills. So data analytics is one, project management is another, and UX design is another. Those three, you and I have been serving this audience for like 20 to 25 years. And we just never heard about project management in the beginning because PM stuff, like that came from the software world for the most part. We had account management without project management. In a typical ad agency, design firm, you didn't have project management. Now project management is bigger. I think of account management as selling.
Right.
And I think of project management as a detailed skill with specific frameworks upon which it makes sense to get appropriate training. And I'm seeing a bigger and bigger market for project management. We don't do that. It's not in our bailiwick, but I know a few organizations who do project management training for the agency world. And I just see those businesses getting bigger and bigger. That's a super valuable skill. I wish my kids who are still in the education phase of their lives would take some project management courses.
Yeah, I'm writing an article right now. It's outlined, the illustration's done. I haven't quite finished it. It's on the idea that AMs and PMs are always failed at something.
Oh, yeah. I totally get that. Yeah.
It's jarring when you hear that, but it's actually beautiful because it means that somebody has naturally landed in a really great place and they have not only the skills, but they have some personal aptitude for it. And with the personality testing I've done, you can see that. And it's so interesting to see. So when you think about project management before the digital stuff, like through the advertising door, that was called traffic, right? The joke back then was there was no testing for whether somebody was good at it. The joke was, and George Johnson and Tony Mike used to say this all the time, it's like the only way to know for sure that you've got the right project person is if you don't like them.
Yeah.
If you like them, they're wrong. And it's not a skill that's highly valued like it should be in that space. But then, like you said, on the software development side, you can't do that. So now we have producers, which is their version of a PM, who are bringing so much more to the table, but they're forgetting the AM side of things, and they're just ignoring it just as badly. It's just a flip problem. So there's so much, I don't know why we got, but this is really interesting stuff to think about how all that's developed. And I see more and more people really building their skills on the PM, and there's better sources for that than there are on the AM.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. The fourth regret you said was, looking back, I don't want to say I should have updated my strategy, positioning, business model for the new reality. In other words, did something happen during the pandemic that surfaced how you could have a better business and you might not have looked at it otherwise The one word I hear a lot, I'd like to know if you hear it as well, is people experimenting more and more with the Hollywood model. I hear that so much. I don't know if you do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that in the last year. I predicted that we would see a lot of it. It seems like mainstream now. I think core teams generally are smaller just because to do what you do, you require an increasingly diverse set of skills, specialized skills, and it doesn't make sense to house all of those specialist skills in-house. So the core team is shrinking. And again, this is anecdotal. I don't have any evidence to support it, but I think I'm seeing it, especially when people gave up their office space and we're working from home. It's like, yeah, we don't need all these people in the payroll. I know where to find these people through various platforms or relationships. I think that trend or prediction has borne out. There's always a backlash to everything. Do you see a backlash to the Hollywood model coming?
I do, yeah. I was letting my mind wander, which is usually a dangerous thing. I have to get it leashed. I can kind of extend the leash, but can't let it get too far. And I was thinking this morning, I wonder if a point of differentiation down the road will be a firm where everybody works in the office.
Totally. I know how I would sell against the Hollywood. I know the pros of the Hollywood model is like, we're not limited by the people we have here. We can go get the best specialists. But one of the implications of that is, well, everybody can.
Yeah. And you tend to go back to the same specialist every time. This idea that you're assembling the right team every time is not really. You're just using the same contractors again.
Yeah. So the prediction was you're going to regret that you didn't update your strategy, your positioning, your business model. That's a bit of a business model. But strategy and positioning, one of the things I was worried about for some business owners going into this pandemic was I thought we would see a lot of people just waiting for things to return to normal. And I saw some of that, but a lot less than I expected to. But the ones you do see where you check in with somebody and they go, oh yeah, it's like still not very good. And we're just kind of waiting for our clients to blah, 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 or the market to blah, blah, blah. And every time I heard that, I thought, oh, you're dead. You're done. If you are sitting waiting for things to change and not making things happen, it's over for you. And I encountered some firms like that, but not nearly as many as I thought I would.
The thing that surprised me on that same vein is I thought more firms would drop their requirements for a client fit and would take on a lot of really bad clients and then immediately regret it because they weren't able to convert them to good clients. I didn't see a lot of that happening. It didn't happen as much as I thought. In other words, I don't see a lot of really bad fit clients on agency rosters that shouldn't have been there in the first place. They seem to have escaped that.
Do you think that's the stimulus money just gave everybody this safety blanket and they didn't have to go to the desperate places that they might otherwise have gone?
That has to have been a part of it. I also think principals, more so than employees, really did an introspective look at what they wanted out of life.
Yeah.
And at the moment when they would be otherwise more tempted than normal to take on a shitty client for the money, they said, nope. It was clear to them that they just became more resolute about what they wanted out of life and out of business. And that temptation was greater, but they just didn't take it, I think.
Yeah, you watch people age, and again, a generalization. At some point, a lot of people get to this point in life where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm too old to whatever though. I'm just not doing what I don't want to do anymore. Kind of like me not going to work.
Right.
And I feel like I saw a lot of that. There's this kind of existential crisis, and a lot of people looked at aspects of their business, their jobs, or their lives and said, I'm not going to do that anymore. So you have a lot of industries that just aren't able to hire people because when things quieted for a while, a lot of people went, I don't really like what it is that I do for a living. I'm not going to do it anymore. Even if I don't know what I'm going to do next, I know I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think we've seen that in different facets of life and business. That can only be a good thing.
What do you think about the expansion, contraction of service offerings? What did people do? What did firms do? Did they expand them and sort of reach in different places, or maybe they didn't as you see it? And was that good, or do they need to clean house again, or do those service offerings that they add and experiment with need to be more permanent?
Again, I have no data here, and it's anecdotal, and I'm probably better off asking you the question because you've probably been more observant of the information that you have seen. I see a barbell where some people have retreated to core services and some have expanded. And I think of our own business. we did some retreating. In fact, again, not to jinx this, but the book I'm writing now is not the book I thought I would be writing for a variety of reasons, one of which was a realization that, this isn't a core offering, this book that I'm thinking of publishing. It's going to distract me for 2 years from more core offerings. And I think even us having to change our business model, we retreated a little bit to more core services or subject areas. And because we did that, I see it everywhere, but I don't know. Maybe you'd have a less biased point of view on whether or not that's really going on.
I think principals expected to get a lot of requests outside the norm, and that didn't happen quite as much. I've not seen as much experimenting with ongoing service offerings as I thought I would. I have seen more of the pre-experimentation. So they are thinking a lot more about what the early stage of the client relationship looks like. So they're being a lot more intentional about that initial diagnostic that we've talked about, or roadmap. That's coming up a lot. They're really thinking way more about the onboarding process for clients and not so much what comes later. There's also a little bit more awareness, I'm seeing this everywhere, about how to incorporate data from what the clients want to keep doing versus what makes sense for you to add. So video is an example of that. If you think about what clients are least likely to let go of, it would be video. So maybe that should influence what we add. They're being more aware of what the client wants when they make those decisions, and not just what those opportunities are that come to them somewhat accidentally.
It's really striking 18 months in when it feels like we're not on the other side of this, but you and I are fully vaccinated and we're leading what I would consider to be pretty normal lives, other than the fact that we're still not traveling. It's really striking the positive implications, again, recognizing that there's been death and other hardships for people. I'm struck by the beneficial effects of the pandemic on people's businesses and lives. And again, it's not all roses. But the positives that I do see, I didn't expect to see so many positive implications from the constraint of having to deal with this pandemic. And we did a podcast on that, on the theory of constraints, or the idea that we all play the game of constraints, how having to deal with the constraint forces some creative thinking in how you have to solve the problem, in this case, run your business. I could not have predicted that there would be as many positive implications as we've experienced.
Oh, yeah, me too. And because we're so good at projections, maybe we should... You realize we just completely wiped out that entire category of our podcast future. But we should take a stab at what it's going to look like for firms 2 years from now. Maybe that's a good topic to cover.
Yeah. Sitting from where I'm sitting right now, I have no idea. But to your point, I've been saying for a long time, if you're an expert at what you do, you have an obligation to try to predict the future. And you don't have an obligation to be right. So I'm really okay with our record,
thank God,
on predicting the future. Because it's not about being right or wrong. It's about giving people something to think about and a point of view that maybe they haven't considered, that they can balance with their own ideas and other point of views they're being exposed to. So it also keeps you sharp. So I think we do have an obligation to keep trying to predict what's going to happen. So do economists, but they never do, and they're never right when they do it. And then, there's always learning and how well we did. And I don't know, are we 50-50 on this one? That's hard to tell.
Yeah, we're at least 50-50. Yeah. I'll live with it too. Well, this has been a fun discussion. The one thing I want to come back and talk more about at some point is the whole work from home thing, like how that impacts positioning, service offerings, recruiting.
Yeah.
There's more clarity now. It still feels like the fog hasn't lifted entirely for me, but I still think there's lots more to think about there. We should do some public thinking about it.
Yeah, and also you and I have talked about when this pandemic is over and we can travel again, we're going to throw a party and call it a conference. But it's really hard still at the end of July 2021. It's still really hard to plan something for even the coming winter. Who knows what we're in for?
Yeah, right. All right, Blair, thank you.
Thanks, David.
Don't quit your job. Well, sorry, you already did.
I'm not quitting. I haven't retired. People in the little village I live in, it's like, oh, you're retired. No, I'm just not going to work. Yeah. So I haven't quit. I'm not retired. I'm just not going.
Okay, we're going to put a link to that YouTube thing in the show.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.